Hey, Roneil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really excited to dig in on Audius, your company, and some of your background as well. But it's a pleasure to have you. I've had a number of people in the crypto space now, and I'm starting to get involved with more of these apps that are kind of ready for regular users. So you're building basically, correct me if I'm wrong, like the SoundCloud, but built upon crypto. And from my perspective, like there's not too many reasons not to jump the boat and move to this new cool platform. So thanks for coming on today and excited about what you're building.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I can give you the little brief overview. So, Audius is a digital streaming service that connects fans directly with artists and exclusive new music. And that direct bit is kind of the key difference between Audius and things like SoundCloud, right? There's because Audius is fully decentralized, owned and operated by the users who use it, operating nodes, uploading content, coming to consume the content. um, the like Audius is able to connect artists and fans directly in a way that they never have been able to interact before. So yeah, we're super excited about it. I think the SoundCloud analogy is a pretty good one to help folks get their heads wrapped around this, but like the broader vision for how Audius evolves over time, I think diverges quite a bit. I hope we can be a lot more than SoundCloud was, I guess is how I'd put it.
Yeah, totally. I get that it's like, the stage one is to kind of match the competition and the existing companies and platforms that are not on crypto. And then in the end, obviously the goal is to leverage the advantages that crypto provides as far as like a structure and a business to make it more advantageous for the artists, for the listeners, etc. So I'm excited to see what you guys roll out in the future and are already kind of starting to. But I thought that was an easy way for people to kind of wrap their minds around what Audius is today.
Totally. Yeah.
Before we dig too deep into Audius, I want to spend some time covering your background. It sounds like a pretty interesting story. Um, let's go back like as far as you can, whether it's growing up or whatnot, and then to kind of discovering crypto or Bitcoin in college, I understand, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I'm Roneil. I'm one of the two co-founders of Audius, and I was born in Los Angeles actually. My parents, after moving around the country quite a bit, kind of settled there. But then soon my family moved to the Washington D.C. suburbs, McLean, Virginia, in the Virginia side of the D.C. suburbs, and that's actually where I kind of did most of my growing up, I guess. And I always kind of was, I guess, both a software engineer and very into music. So I played drums for many years, and ended up sort of realizing that I think I didn't have the natural talent that you need to be successful professionally doing something like that. So I ended up stepping away from it. But the thing from that time in my life that I did hang on to was tinkering with and building software. So I kind of got involved in this Hackintosh community when I was in high school. So basically what a Hackintosh is a Windows PC or like a Wintel PC. You could think of it that way, running Mac OS. So there's a way that you could kind of muck with the internals of Mac OS to get it to run on commodity hardware. And that was sort of my first like time really sort of playing with computers from more the engineering perspective and less the like playing video games perspective, I guess. But yeah, I kind of continued doing software engineering stuff. Ended up going to school at Stanford and moving to California to do that. And that's also where I spent a lot more time with my co-founder Forrest, who we now work together on Audius. And yeah, I guess it was actually in high school, or sorry, in college, Forrest and I, among a group of friends, started this little like mining operation. What was interesting was we were able to, because the dorms on campus had free electricity, we were able to buy like secondhand cheap hardware that was like not profitable to mine with, but it was profitable for us to mine with because our cost of operating these things was zero, right? So it was just sort of I guess, arbitraging the university's resources perhaps, but that was actually really my first foray into crypto. It's not like I read the Bitcoin white paper and was like, oh my God, this is game changing. It was like us as a group of friends were like, here's a cool way to get some beer money. Like, let's try this and see what we can do. And that's what sort of sent me down, I guess, wanting to learn more about crypto, et cetera. But sort of did that for a few years, was also doing software engineering work. When I finished college in 2014, me and another friend from that group actually started this like Bitcoin peer-to-peer payment product. So it was called Backslash. It was like sort of Venmo for Bitcoin is kind of the easiest way to explain it. It was like a social layer on top of just a simple Bitcoin wallet product. We grew to like 25,000 or so monthly users, but like couldn't really figure out how to grow past that, and ended up winding down the project about a year later in early 2015. And I think in retrospect, it was a variety of things that caused that to not work out, but the biggest one was that like people don't want to send Bitcoin to each other, right? Like all of our users, when we talk to them, were like, I really want people to send me Bitcoin so that I can accumulate more of it, right? But if you have one side of a two-sided marketplace, it's not going to work, right? So, a good lesson, a good learning. I ended up spending after that a couple of years at Kleiner Perkins, the venture firm covering crypto for them. So they formed like a seed practice that was focused on a number of kind of early stage areas that they felt were a little bit too early to be doing, Series A, Series B, Series C stage investing in, but were still sort of interesting and wanted to be able to like start to participate in, right? So I did join the seed for Lightning Labs when I was there, like the Lightning Network company. I also kind of helped advise on and worked on in some of the later stage crypto things that happened, like Align Commerce, which rebranded as Veeam later on, this cross-border crypto payment product. But I don't know. I kind of got the itch to go build stuff again. So I ended up leaving Kleiner in mid 2017. And that takes us kind of to Audius now. So my co-founder Forrest and I actually had this idea in like 2014, 2015 or so, when we were working on that Bitcoin wallet thing I told you about. We were just both big electronic fans, and we saw all of our favorite creators at that time getting kicked off of SoundCloud, not being able to monetize on SoundCloud, just having this very antagonistic relationship with their platform. And we kind of asked ourselves, like, what if you could create a platform for sharing music that's owned and operated by the users who make it valuable, right? And at the time, we concluded the tech didn't exist to do that. Like, we would have had to be, I don't know if you were familiar with any of the companies from like that era, but most folks were literally like forking the Bitcoin code base and like building their own blockchains to like go after these kind of application specific use cases. And to layer on top of that, we would have had to build our own decentralized file system of sorts, right? But between 2015 and like early 2018, when we started Audius officially, IPFS and Ethereum both kind of entered the community, entered the chat, if you will, right? And gave us a set of tools that actually made this thing possible. Yeah.
It's a great story. I appreciate you telling it kind of from top to bottom. A number of areas I want to dig in. The first, going back to your Stanford days, you mentioned the introduction through mining, and that you were basically arbitraging, the power was coming from the computational power and electricity was coming from the school, and you're getting rewarded through this mining. I haven't spoken with too many people who are mining back in those days. Like, can you paint a picture of what that was like? Like, how much was a Bitcoin worth back then? How much are you receiving in exchange for the mining efforts? Like, how did you decide, you were going to do it? Was it just like as simple as the fact that the work was basically free, and the Bitcoin, however nominal it might be, was pretty reliably coming in?
Yeah, so it was actually, even by the time we started mining, which was like late 2012 to 2013, it was no longer profitable or even like feasible to mine Bitcoin with commodity hardware. So we were actually mining these scrypt based altcoins. So think like Litecoin, Dogecoin. There were like a bunch of others at that time too. Like I don't even remember what what the names of all of them were, but there was basically the way that this would work was if you had like scrypt mining hardware, there were so many scrypt based coins, and scrypt is just the hashing algorithm, and that's different from like the SHA hashing algorithm that Bitcoin uses. So it requires like different hardware, but for anything that is scrypt compatible, you can use the same hardware on all of them. There were literally these mining pools that you could join that would calculate the current profitability to mine a given coin and then like switch for you. So you could point your miners to the pool and say like, I will just mine anything scrypt and pay me out in Bitcoin because I actually don't care about any of these other random coins. They just, my hardware is just better suited to doing this. And they would calculate and switch between mining Dogecoin and Litecoin and other things, but actually pay you back Bitcoin, interestingly enough. So I think we were already entering the phase of like more professional centralized mining organizations, like especially in China and elsewhere. But on these more fringe currencies, it was still possible, like as a random individual, to like earn meaningful amounts. Now when we were earning Bitcoin, it was like in the earliest days, like the tens of dollars per Bitcoin. In the later days, I think the hundreds of dollars. Like we were kind of mining all the way through that precipitous kind of explosion of Mount Gox, or precipitous maybe is not the right word, but I'm sure kind of the way, like a lot of people thought at that time, like this like might be the end for Bitcoin, like
It's
this is really bad, whatever. But so we kind of mined through that whole cycle, and then we decided to sell it all to go on an awesome spring break trip in 2014. We went to Honduras and did a bunch of scuba diving and had a great time, this whole group. But so we didn't earn a ton of money doing it. Now, had we held on to that, it would be a lot more today, but I don't think any of us have any regrets. We had a lot of fun on that trip, so we're all good with it. But it's just funny in retrospect to think about, we were like 20 and 21 years old and had no business like managing assets like that, right? Like we were just like, oh, money, like let's spend it, let's have fun, which is is quite funny. But anyway, sorry, that was to get back to your question. It was really just there were different tokens that you could mine, but we were converting everything back to Bitcoin, and we were able to run. It was sort of like commodity GPU hardware, actually very similar to like how people mine Ethereum today, right? It's buying off the shelf AMD GPUs and running them, in sort of a like high availability, high uptime way.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You're basically mining these lesser known coins. I mean, they're relatively well known now, but not Bitcoin, like Litecoin and Dogecoin. And then you're trading them immediately for Bitcoin. So that's like a pretty good setup. And you're making this Bitcoin, it's like in the tens or maybe hundreds of dollars, which is, at the time might have just seemed like, like you said, like beer money. And then you go and spend it on the spring break. And like, it's nice to hear that like you're able to like laugh that off now. I think there's a certain like characteristic of certain people that enables people to do that, because that's, I don't know if everyone that you were working with, and it sounds like most people are taking it like pretty much in stride, but it's actually like a pretty tough thing to get over. Like everyone even if you forget like getting like super rich, like I think most people would like financial freedom, myself included, to be able to do what you want. And, not to the same extent, but I can kind of sympathize. I bought Tesla like about a year ago, or whenever it was, like in the low 200s, and put a substantial amount of my money on it, and basically knew that it was unsustainable and was just looking for kind of a quick hit. I was pretty confident, and then I ended up selling the vast majority of it in the 300s, and then like it went up to 2400. So it's like I could have made like 10x. Instead I made like 50%. It was still good. I actually did similar thing. I went and traveled the world, quit my job and traveled the world, so I have no complaints. And I look back at that, and like I think I take a similar stance to you, which is like, you know what, I learned to some extent a valuable lesson, like always hold a piece of something that you believe in, or at least something that seems interesting, and you have some conviction in. And then on the other side, it's like, you're going to live the rest of your life regretting selling something too soon and not making enough money. Like that's probably not the best approach. How do you think, like, did you get over that, right away when it's going to 1,000 and then 10,000, and as of this morning, 15,000?
Yeah, it's definitely a pretty cool day that we chose to be talking about this, right? Yeah, man, the way I see it, like I have a roof over my head. I get food every day. Like, more money or less money would not really materially change my day-to-day life, right? It's just kind of it could have been a neat thing, but it doesn't. I'm not losing over any sleep over it. If that's kind of what you're asking. And like I think all of us who've been in crypto for a while have like screwed this up so many times, right? I definitely didn't learn the lesson on our spring break trip. Like I also had gotten a bunch of ETH just literally to play with it when Homestead came out, when ETH was like 50 cents or 70 cents or something. I don't even remember. You had to go on Poloniex and like do all this nonsense to actually buy it, because it didn't trade on like any larger thing. And then when it was like $12, I was like, oh my god, this is so much money. Like like I just pulled it out then, right? And now ETH is, obviously we know where it is now. So I think my takeaways from all that maybe were different from yours, in that I just realized like I'm probably not a good trader. Like I just enjoy building stuff and being focused on that. So like after those two lessons, I never sell anything. I only buy things, and then it actually makes your taxes a lot easier too, right? Because if you never sell things, you're never having to think about that, right? You just keep accumulating, keep buying, and see what happens, right? But yeah, I don't know, no skin off my back, I guess. Like I think I just feel fortunate that I got to live through those times and be a part of sort of the community that has formed around our space.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. I think you mentioned like, you're not a trader, you're a builder. And it sounds like you did kind of learn the lesson after a couple times, and now you're taking a more, whole long-term approach. But I think like, it's cooler for everyone to have you building than just trading and holding anyway. It seems like, that's gonna come to fruition nicely with Audius and, whatever else you go to build in the future. So let's talk about something you built in the past. You mentioned Backslash, kind of the Venmo for crypto, or maybe only for Bitcoin. But regardless, it seems like you were, you said you had like 25,000 users, and it just wasn't, Bitcoin. I've talked about this before, but like my personal view is that you mentioned no one wanted to give it away. Everyone wanted, they're like, yeah, pay me in Bitcoin, but I don't want to give you any Bitcoin. And I think that's really just because it's not functional as a medium of exchange yet. And my personal view on like the evolution of money is that it needs to establish itself as a major store of value. Like, we see today, the price going up 10%, overnight, basically. That's not something that people would want to use as a medium of exchange, because it's too, the opportunity to hold it and make money is too great. But ultimately it might flatten out. And I think the Venmo for crypto or Venmo for Bitcoin idea could actually make some sense, or some alternative of that. And then you thought of like the idea for Audius you mentioned even back in those days, but realized, it's too early and this is going to be really hard and we're going to be wasting a lot of time on infrastructure and like foundational stuff. So, let's wait. Do you think, was there any kind of perspective gained from doing this Venmo type of app too early that you realized like we need to wait until the right time on this idea? Or was it more of just like a personal thing? You guys weren't ready to start something new. How did you go about like pocketing this thing and then ultimately realizing when the time was right?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think, yes, it really did influence a lot of, our later thinking towards, how you build products and how you think about markets, I guess. And that's actually something I was really looking to gain perspective on by working in venture capital for a bit, and that was why I chose to head to Kleiner Perkins like after we kind of finished the wind down process for Backslash. But the biggest mistake I think we made was like, so it was this friend of mine, Paul, and I started Backslash and sort of built the whole product, shipped it, everything else. He and I had a bunch of Bitcoin and we're like using it to pay each other back for stuff, right? Like literally we'd go out to dinner and be like, oh, I'll just like pay you with some of the Bitcoin. Cause like, part of it was we had no money, like actual money to pay for things. So we would like use our like Bitcoin bags to do so. But part of it was also, I guess like our intuition for Backslash was like, if we do this, like other people might want to do it too. And that intuition turned out to be false, right? Like there were very few other people actually wanted to do that too. And I think it's almost like, what is the narrative around Bitcoin? Like you don't pay each other with gold, right? If Bitcoin is sort of, it's becoming this kind of like digital store of value, digital gold kind of a thing. That's not something that you would be using as like a medium of exchange per se. So I think the biggest lesson we took away from this was just that us wanting something doesn't mean that the world wants it. And kind of, figure out what the world wants before you go build it was sort of the other side of it. And as much as I want to say, like, with Audius, we had this like great premonition that like, oh my God, this is going to be like super cool thing and whatever. And, today we have reached a level of scale that's, dwarfs Backslash, right? Like there are 1.2 million plus people that use Audius every month right now. That's still, it's not like we like knew that this would happen, right? We had this intuition, but the difference was this time we actually went out and like talked to people about it and tried to understand like what are the problems that like it is this actually something artists like broadly feel, or is this just something that like our friends who happen to be music producers are like telling us like that they're getting screwed over, right? So I think that was the biggest takeaway from it. So I do think we had to go through that journey to get to here, right? And that all of that learning kind of made its way over. So you kind of I don't know. I guess like I'm just happy that we ended up where we are and we have the chance to kind of do what we're doing today. But it kind of, I think the most important thing is you just sort of, you have to actually like internalize what you're learning and what you're seeing and be able to like act differently in the future from how you acted in the past.
Right. And that's a super useful perspective, I think, helpful for a lot of people who want to start companies in an early space or in crypto specifically, especially when you're talking to some of these artists and understanding what's broken in the current music industry. What were some of the things that stood out? Like I know part of your guys, one of your core things is like your anti takedowns that, people had music taken off SoundCloud, like you might have mentioned that, um, you know, that's not something that is good for the fans. That's not something that's good for the artists. What were some of the things that came up in those early diligence type of calls?
Yeah, I think it that was the symptom, but that was not the problem, right? The problem with the way that things were set up previously was that artists never had a seat at the table, right? Basically, these platforms they set themselves up to kind of like mine artists and creators and even like record labels for value, right? They were like a resource to be squeezed for value, and that value was content, right? The more content they could get out of these folks and onto their platforms, the more fans they could bring in, and that's what sort of helped their business, right? Whether it was advertising primarily in the case of SoundCloud, and then later they rolled out the subscription thing with the labels sort of blessing, or like that's sort of the I think where we saw this like fundamental misalignment of incentives between like treating artists as resources when they should be treated as like owners and operators of businesses, and financially incentivizing their respective business with like the broader sort of platform or networks kind of stability and success was where we saw the opportunity to kind of do something here. And it wasn't just SoundCloud. I think we happened to be coming of age in that era when SoundCloud was like this sort of, SoundCloud was where culture was made in music, right? Like from 2012 to 2015, like that was the only thing that mattered, right? Like people would literally go release things on SoundCloud and not bother to release them anywhere else because all their engagement was coming from SoundCloud. And like it's crazy too to think about how much that has changed between 2015 and today. But that kind of the community there sort of died, and again, like the takedown issue was like a symptom of this, but the broader kind of issue that existed there was that like SoundCloud did not really care about their artists and their creators, right? Like there was no sort of incentive alignment towards like helping those people do well. SoundCloud's business model today actually is like charge creators, charge artists to upload content and to host content, charge listeners or like show advertisements to listeners when they listen to the content, and then pay the labels a ton of money and then be unprofitable as a business afterwards, right? Because they have to pay the labels so much that they like can't sort of, afford to operate, right? And like none of those three parties are happy with the current state of affairs, right? Like the labels feel like they have no sovereignty or like negotiating leverage around like how their content gets shared or how their content gets priced or whatever. Artists are like, we're like paying you to give you content that makes you money, and then like we don't get any of that money. That doesn't make sense. And then on the fan side, the user experience sucks, right? Like if you try to go listen to something on SoundCloud today, you'll see like 15 ads and get very quickly get annoyed. So it was just like this. What we heard across the board was like, this is not working for any of us. And what I guess our sort of thesis around forming Audius was that, or our conclusion from all of that was that the problem is that these folks aren't like directly sort of financially incentivized to make the platform successful. It's actually quite the opposite. Like from the perspective of all of those folks interacting with the platform, their incentive is towards like making sure that many platforms exist and supporting them such that like no one platform gains monopoly status, as we're starting to see with Spotify today, right? Like Spotify actually is almost, when you see the moves that they're starting to make to try to consolidate their position, they feel that they're operating from a position of like monopoly power, right? And our kind of rethinking of that approach was to say like, what if music distribution could be a public utility, right? Like a publicly owned and operated good that everyone kind of has the opportunity to equitably benefit from and transparently benefit from, so that like there are no backroom shady deals happening. There's no preferential treatment given to larger groups over smaller groups. Like all of these things that I guess like all of that rhetoric is what's like resonated so much with the artists coming to Audius. They're choosing to upload things exclusively to Audius because of that, and then that's driving the fan behavior, right? Which is super fans of a given artist are coming to Audius to listen to like pieces of their catalog they can't find anywhere else.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I'm like standing here, I'm just like, I'm in. Like you talked about, it was like a casual roast of SoundCloud, which was cool to hear, and it was super coherent and organized, and um, just makes a lot of intuitive sense. I guess a good place to start might be, in digging a little deeper in this thing. You talked about how artists are not incentivized to be on SoundCloud, to share, to bring their fans to SoundCloud. It's actually very bad for them. It's also kind of bad for the fans with the ads. It's also not great for the music labels, and it's not even good for SoundCloud because they're losing money through all of it. Um, with the artists, as far as I've seen, like you guys have taken an artist first approach where obviously, you want the consumers to enjoy the product as well, but it seems like you're betting on kind of if we build it, they will come in terms of collecting some of the best artists in the world on your platform, having them kind of bring their fans over because it's profitable to among other things to do so. How did you kind of come to this artist first approach, if that's right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that actually was really inspired by Justin Kahn is an advisor to Audius and has kind of been close with us for a while. So he was one of the co-founders of Twitch, and one of the little like nuggets of learning that I actually took away from sort of conversations with him and more broadly around how Twitch was able to like grow their creator audience. They just hyper focused on serving the creator at the expense of everything else. Like a story I heard was actually that like, when they were getting ready to go through the sale process with Amazon, it's like Amazon kind of approached them and wanted to buy the company or whatever. Like they didn't even have like instrumentation on the sort of like fan or viewer side of things to be able to like share a lot of the metrics that like folks needed to know, because they just didn't care about them. All they cared about was like, do our creators like us, and do they keep coming back, and do they like value what we're giving them, right? And the thinking was that if we can build the best thing possible for our creators, they will choose to support us and eventually like bring their fans to us over time. And that's kind of exactly the approach that we've been taking with Audius as well, right? Where musicians, we're focused on so far focused on musicians who control the rights to their own content, which means that they have the legal right to go upload that content like wherever they want. And that is the category of folks that we want Audius to hyper serve, right? Those are the people who it should be like so obvious for them to use Audius because it helps them earn more, connect with their fans better, and own their audience, right? To have control of their audience that they've built up in a way that like they sort of have never had before. And then win by that, right? If creators choose to share things with Audius that like they don't share elsewhere, the fan base that they have will eventually start to like come hang out here too, because they get to listen to stuff here and find stuff here. So that's not to say like we don't care about the fan side. I guess what it is to say though is we see kind of building up our artist base and catalog as being kind of the most important kind of step to make Audius something that matters in the world, right? That's sort of the the tack that we've taken so far. And yeah, interestingly, right now, actually, even our ratios of we have about 40,000 or so artists that have shared content on Audius. We see like 1.2 million people a month listening to things here. So like we actually have quite a large base of like listeners that are coming to Audius every month to like find stuff. Clicking through a link on Twitter or like wherever else it might be, and sort of the driver behind all of that, right, is the creators sharing content here, right? Like that's the even like all of our rhetoric that we share publicly is trying to like highlight that fact, right? Like creators are what make platforms valuable, and they should demand something in return for contributing that value. That's like how we've tried to like approach all of this.
Yeah, so some of these early artists, can you talk about how some of them have come on board from like, those early conversations you might have even had pre-launch of the company to today when you've got 40,000 artists now. Obviously, there's some bigger names in there and some of the lesser names don't take any work, I'm sure. And some of the bigger ones might need a little bit of recruiting or they might find you, through another artist or something like that.
Yeah, so I think our first like larger artist to sort of work with us and help advise us on like how we should be sort of approaching this and how we should be positioning things and everything else was Blau. His DJ name is 3LAU, but it said Blau, and his name's Justin Blau, and he actually like kind of joined us as an advisor in like late 2018. So this was like company was like 4 months old or something at that time. We had like no product. And it was sort of he has like quite a large following as a DJ and a music producer. I think he has over 2 million folks listen to his music every month on Spotify and elsewhere. He this was something that like he had been looking for a while. He's also like very deep in crypto. Like right now he's doing some experiments around NFTs, for example, and a number of other things. But like he was the sort of basically started working with us like at a very key time and helped us really like think about these foundational things, right? Like how should Audius go to market and exist and everything else. What was interesting though actually is like so Blau is really the one that like took the bet on us first, right? And having one name that folks recognized actually made like subsequent conversations much easier, right? People were like, oh, these are not just like two random kids trying to tell us that like this music thing is cool or whatever. This is actually maybe something I should pay attention to. And I think the way this always works is these things snowball over time, right? As more and more people join a new thing and then their peers see one another joining, they too come join. But what really attracted Justin at that time to like wanting to work with us and wanting to like decentralize music distribution was that he as an artist he was very uniquely positioned in that he happened to be like super into crypto and like trading crypto and doing a bunch of other things during the 2017 boom. Given his position of like having built up a very successful like kind of business of creating music and sharing music, he saw this very natural fit. So he was like actively looking for like who is actually going to be able to crack this nut, and we were the team that he thought could. But kind of taking the broader picture of like how do artists more broadly engage with this, I think it's really that SoundCloud analogy is like the easiest way to sort of unlock this for them. Every artist who is making music in the early 2010s, I think, remembers this era of SoundCloud very fondly. And our community on Audius is starting to like recreate that zeitgeist in a way, right? There's so much kind of like cool activity happening just because artists can come here directly and like do whatever they want, right? And there are these very magical things that happen. Like a lot of folks don't realize you as a artist or creator can't upload things directly to Spotify. You actually have to go through like a third-party distributor who then places your content there. You have to plan releases very far in advance. Whereas like some of the most interesting content that's come on Audius has been like, oh, I like woke up today and made this cool beat. Like, let me chuck it up here and like see what people think of it, right? It's just such a different engagement model. And that's a broader thing. Like we actually don't really see ourselves being competitive with Spotify for that reason. But what we do see, I guess, is like Audius starting to like recreate this emergent behavior that folks used to do on SoundCloud previously. So that analogy, I think, is what kind of makes it click for most people, and they're like, okay, like this is a community of like deeply invested like music creators, and it's a place for me to like share cool stuff and like see what people think of it, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you kind of go down that road, because when I'm thinking about, you're talking about like basically lowering friction to upload versus a Spotify, um, for the artists, and all of a sudden they're able to like upload a beat, or like even like a work in progress, or maybe something that's just like 30 seconds that they just came up with, and all of a sudden the nature of music could shift to some degree as well. I think with the popularity of your platform. Um, it's really interesting to hear how Blau was involved with the early days. I actually had him on the podcast a few weeks ago. Didn't get that story though, so really cool to hear it here. And I think, he's obviously super forward thinking in everything crypto, music, and obviously overlapping. So makes a lot of sense, and not necessarily surprised to hear that. You talked about like, you don't necessarily view yourself as a competitor with Spotify. I was thinking that earlier, like it sounds like you're on a trajectory where, even though Spotify is acting as a monopoly, and they're trying to now become like the home of podcasts as well with the Joe Rogan acquisition and things like that, you guys are just doing a pretty fundamentally different thing, that is obviously decentralized and gives everyone who's a part of the network, rewards for contributing to the network, which I think is an awesome, factor that crypto enables for businesses that just wasn't really possible earlier. You can't give, I just talked about this yesterday, you can't give like every Uber driver equity in Uber. It's just not practical nor legal for that matter. So it's cool that you found with the music industry something that I think is widely regarded as fairly broken, or at the very least not optimized for artists. And you're finding a way to better capture the value that people attribute to listening to music, which like everyone loves listening to music. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people. Um, so how do you think about like coexisting with Spotify, I guess, in the future?
It's a great question. And I think it's actually best explained by another analogy. So like in video distribution, you kind of have like at one end of the spectrum, with the dimension of the spectrum being like how professional the content is and the distribution mechanics, like Netflix, Hulu, HBO now, like all of those like very professionally produced and sort of like very controlled mediums of distribution. And then at the whole like entirely other end of the spectrum, which I would kind of call like the Wild West of like, everyone can do whatever they want, is YouTube, right? Where like those two categories of things can like coexist with one another in a way that they like very obviously don't compete, right? Like YouTube is this, anyone can chuck up anything they want. Most people aren't paying subscribers. What they are is like seeing ads and like engaging with short form content, like just different emergent types of content. Whereas like Netflix is like, okay, you're like $100 million big budget movie, like this is where that goes, right? And goes on different terms and everything else. We see the way Spotify has structured themselves as really being suited towards and conducive towards being kind of like the Netflix of music, if you will, right? Like you have to go through a professional distributor to place content on Spotify. You can't just upload stuff there. It takes time. It takes planning. The way that sort of discoverability on Spotify works, it's very, very difficult if you're not like a major label supported artist. So where we see the opportunity in audio being is to compete on that like user generated Wild West side of the spectrum, where like anyone can share any cool stuff that they want. And in audio, that used to be SoundCloud, but like SoundCloud's usage today is about 20% of what it was at its peak like 5 to 6 years ago in terms of monthly users. So like there's this kind of vacuum that's emerged there. Like no one does user generated audio anymore, really. Like artists who used to share things in that way have now kind of tried to shoehorn Spotify into serving that role, and it really doesn't, right? Like Spotify is a great place to release your like mastered, well-produced album that you spent like 6 months on or whatever, but like you're not going to chuck something up on your Spotify that like you've just just sort of like cranked out in the morning or whatever, right? So I think that's where we see the opportunity existing in audio to like have something with a much lower barrier to like uploading stuff, as you mentioned. So we really see Audius competing with SoundCloud like very head on, and we actually think tools like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, they're all playing a different game, right? Which is like, let's be a very, very professional source of music distribution to distribute like The Doors or like Led Zeppelin or like things like this, right? It's just super different, right? Like, I don't think you would ever see big YouTube creators like starting to share things on Netflix, for example, right? So I think that's where we see this opportunity opening up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, you can't necessarily say what YouTube's worth these days being part of Google, but I think it's suffice to say, both YouTube and Netflix are doing just fine. And so to take that analogy and apply it to music and put Spotify or Apple on the Netflix side, certainly leaves a tremendous amount of room for opportunity for you guys. Last question, and then I want to give you the last word, but understand you guys did a significant token drop a couple weeks ago. Can you talk about that and how it fits into the future for Audius?
Yeah, so kind of timed with the launch, the public launch of the Audius network. So Audius as a product has been live for over a year now, and has grown its usage during that time to where it is today. But that was all operating in like an incentivized testnet kind of capacity. So there were sort of node operators running nodes on the network, but they were doing so altruistically and in the hopes that like when the mainnet launches, they would have a chance to kind of monetize the operation of their nodes. So these nodes are hosting content, indexing metadata, and they have a few other tasks that they kind of do to keep the network alive. So with that mainnet launch happening, we also, Audius is a community-owned and operated network, right? Like that's always sort of the been the vision for how this works. With the launch of the token, we were actually able to fulfill that vision by distributing 50 million audio tokens, the Audius platform token, to the top 10,000 accounts on Audius. So the way top account was defined was basically a formula that was designed in concert with a bunch of our kind of close community members' input and feedback to try to value the combination of like how many times content that your account has uploaded has been streamed, how much you have engaged with other people's content. So if you reposted other people's content, if you made playlists of other people's content, basically it's kind of like how much have you been using Audius, and based on that, like getting a relative score that gave you like a score weighted proportion of that total 50 million, right? So among the 10,000 artists, we had folks, or sorry, 10,000 accounts on Audius, where the majority were artists, but a very meaningful portion were also like curators of playlists and just listeners who had been engaging a lot. The ranges of kind of reward that those folks were able to get were all the way like kind of in the 400 to 500 token range at the smaller end, all the way up to like 50 to 60,000 tokens at like the larger end of the range. So I think what was really cool with this was to see, our artists were just so excited to have a seat at the table for the first time. So the point of the Audius token is there are three pillars of functionality in it. It's staking, so securing the network by staking on nodes that operate and earning revenue by doing so. It's feature access. So as an artist, you can stake the token to like access features within Audius as they continue to be rolled out over time. And then it's governance. So as a user of the token, you actually get to vote on any changes made to the network. And the way that our governance system is structured, like the project team that built the first version of Audius, like of which I am a part of, we actually can't change anything about it without the community's sign off and involvement, which is such a cool thing, right? It was like the whole ethos was to create something that the community controlled and that the community like had the right to do with what they wanted. And this launch was the way for us to actually like realize that vision. So on a going forward basis now, the Audius token supply inflates or is issued at a rate of 7 to 10% per year off of the base that we began with, and that 7 to 10% inflation is actually all being distributed back to folks who are participating in the community. So the reason we structured it in this way, and where we got a lot of really great feedback from our community in structuring it in this way, was to basically create an opportunity to like earn a seat at the table over time in Audius, no matter when you show up, right? Like, and that kind of issuance will actually continue in perpetuity, right? So as a creator in Audius and as a node operator in Audius, or like as any sort of productive community member in Audius, we believe like you should have an opportunity to kind of start to aggregate control of the underlying tools over time in that process.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, it's got to be so tough to, there's so many considerations. It's so tough to nail that at this stage with a consumer app where it's just such unprecedented territory. But it's, I like the way that you've described it, the way that you're thinking about it. I think you've certainly been extremely thoughtful from, pre-launch, pre-build of the company to today, and thinking about how to give people who might not discover Audius for a few years the opportunity to, earn a seat at the table, like you said, with a lot of contribution, whether it's engagement or uploading songs or whatever it might be. I could talk more about this stuff, but I know we're coming up on time, so I want to wrap it up there. But thank you so much, Roneil, for coming on today. It was super fascinating to hear about Audius and your story. I did some diligence in advance, but just after talking to you for an hour, I'm super bullish on Audius, and I'll just say that publicly. I think it's an awesome idea, and you guys are executing really well.
Thanks so much for the kind words, and thank you so much for having me. So yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about Audius, you can check out our Twitter is probably the sort of the authoritative place to get announcements, updates, etc. It's at Audius Project is the handle. There's also a Discord community and other things you can come hang out in. But come hang out, give us a shout, and our community is very, very welcoming to newcomers. We'd love to see you around.